All right, I'm Mary Catherine Hess, and I'm with Brady Couch. And would you mind telling us a bit about you?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Brady Couch, as Mary Catherine said. I'm a philosophy graduate student here at the University of South Carolina. Um, I got my undergraduate degree in philosophy as well. Is that all you're
Yeah,
looking for?
yeah, that's fine. So why did you decide to become a philosopher?
So the spring semester of my sophomore year of undergrad, I took a couple courses. One was formal logic, which is sort of a math requirement here at USC, or can substitute in. So as I said, it's a very formalized process, and also an ethics course in engineering. And I really enjoyed both of those because I thought they were exciting topics that had me thinking about things like life specifically that I had never experienced before. I found myself asking questions that I had never thought about before, and I just found that very intriguing and riveting. So through this process, when I decided to declare as a major, I just figured out that I was able to engage with and criticize intellectual and social dogma. I thought that was really exciting. And then once I realized that the misconception, or that there is a misconception about philosophy in that it doesn't make any progress, that it's just people say whatever they want and that's it. That's it. You know, that a philosophy is someone telling you maybe like a few sentences about what they think is most important in life and you move on.
Yeah.
It was much more intricate, and I realized that the field did make progress. So that was really encouraging and led me to decide to stay within the field.
Wow, that's awesome. That's really cool. So, as a philosophy major, as someone who hopes to have a life in philosophy, what kind of text do you interact with? What do you read, both print and non-print?
Right. So I particularly enjoy history of philosophy, so I read a lot of books and articles pertaining to historical figures and works that they have written. So analysis of these things, sort of trying to tie it back into contemporary life and why it's still important. That's the gist of it. So in terms of interest within philosophy that I tend to read the most, as I said, historical practice, ethics, things like moral psychology, so sort of like philosophy of mind.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see here. That's those are probably, if I had to break it down to what I most engage with, is that there's also a topic called metaphysics that I read about, but I'm not as into that. So let's see. Those are the print that I read. I also read about the field itself, so philosophy as a field. So for instance, there's something called the continental versus analytic divide, and it's essentially exactly what it sounds like. There's a divide within the field, people that do certain types of work, and sometimes they are adverse to one another.
Okay.
So trying to bridge the gap with why are there these exclusive camps and people tend to not get along in the profession sometimes. Obviously that's a big generalization, but trying to read about the field, learn about it. Do you want just like for fun reading?
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
Everything? Okay. Well, I like to read mystery novels, like crime stuff. So recently I've been reading Sherlock Holmes. I also like to read about other academic fields. So like I have a intro level book on contemporary debates in astrophysics because I just am interested in having conversational knowledge of a lot of different fields.
Yeah.
That's just important to me. I like to read a lot of articles about social and cultural things. That's probably mainly what I interact with.
So it sounds like your main point to read, the main takeaway of when you do read is that you want to gain things so you're just more knowledgeable about different aspects of culture, about life, different professions, things like that.
Yeah, precisely. I think that that's definitely correct. And then in terms of just the fun reading, sometimes it's just because I want to beat the author to the conclusion. I find that to be pretty rewarding when I like can figure out what's going on before it unfolds.
Oh, that's
It's
awesome.
kind of a fun challenge for me. So I like that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Awesome. So you read so much with what you just told me. So what does it look like when you begin reading a text centered around philosophy? When you have like those lenses on?
When you say, what does it look like when I begin, just how do I select what I'm reading?
Like how do you select it? How do you do something before you start reading? Or when you are reading, do you take notes? What does that look like?
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, so when I begin reading a text, if it's not presupposing that it's a class that assigns text, but things that I'm sort of setting the stage for myself, I tend to first try to figure out what's the overall topic that I want to pull from, and then what might be my aim in doing so. So for instance, when I read about metaphysics, it's generally not because I'm just purely interested in metaphysics, but more because the theory involved ties into someone's ethical disposition. Okay. So I can sort of read about that and have it in the back of my mind so that I know that it could be lurking in the background, and I'm able to make those connections, and it's not something that goes over my head. So I try to figure out what's the point in me reading this first. It could be, just to have that historical competency, or like an example like I just said. When I read, I tend to do a lot of different things. I find that highlighting is not very effective because people think that is like the best way to sort of commit this stuff to memory. But in my experience, I'll flip a book back open and look through it, and I'll see lines that I highlighted, and I don't remember why is it that I highlighted. So I'll do a number of different things. If it's my book, this is sort of controversial. People have mixed feelings about this, but I'll write in the margins with almost each paragraph what was like the main takeaway, what was important about that, how does it connect. So whether I want to mark it, so I put a Post-it note in there and write what I want, or I include little notes in the margins, my train of thought. So when I go back later, I can kind of put myself or immerse myself back into when did I first read this, instead of that seeming so distant and not really knowing what was going through my mind when I first read. I'll take notes to outline on my computer so I can sort of see the main points throughout. And that helps me keep track of an argument, because there are some arguments that can span like 50 pages or something, and you can get into the middle and not see where it's going, what's the upshot of this. So by doing that, I can kind of keep myself on track and make sure that what I'm reading actually sticks, for one, but that I also don't get lost throughout. So that's generally how I go about reading something that's academic.
Awesome. So would you say, what it sounds like is that your reading is very active?
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. It sounds like there's a lot of synthesizing that goes into your reading.
And I imagine there are people that can just read something and sort of remember it, but I'm not one of these people. If I just read it, I'll forget everything. Right. So doing that is the way that I can really reconstruct what did I just read. And like you said, synthesize, connect everything, and commit it to long-term memory. Right. So that's something that I personally have to do.
Awesome. So you talked about taking the little notes in the margins, doing outlines. What other kind of writings do you do?
Yeah, so within my field, generally speaking, I'll just have to write an argument. And it could be, at this stage, I'm not really given prompts, so it's not a professor telling me they want to hear from me about whatever. Instead, what I do is find something that's inspired me throughout a course that I may be taking, maybe what I firmly disagree with, or what I feel is valuable, etc. And I'll kind of pick that topic, and I just have to develop my own thesis. So again, keeping close to me what matters to me, so like moral psychology, ethics, stuff like that. So when someone writes about say a model of human nature that I think doesn't really work out, that there are some inconsistencies in what they said. I can develop a thesis on that, but that's all internal. That's all something that I work on myself. And then from there, I'll generally write papers. They all vary in length. I mean, it could be 20 pages or more. It could be something that's more like 8 to 10. There's plenty of room for really, really long monographs and articles in philosophy. There's also room for short arguments in philosophy that I think is sometimes overlooked. So it's a mix. There's a mixture there. So engagement with historical texts, because that's what I like to emphasize, and then also secondary literature. So part of being in the field is being able to contribute to the field, but you can't really do that if you don't know what are the other academics who are writing about these kinds of things. So sort of keeping up with the trends, seeing what's commonly accepted, and what maybe is outdated. Again, going back to what I said about philosophy, making progress, genuine progress. So keeping up with that wave is really important if I'm going to write an article or a paper that means anything.
Right.
So it's important to not only engage with the primary literature, right? So like people think of Descartes or Kant, Aristotle, something like that. But it's just as important to know what's going on within the field. So who are the other scholars right now, knowing their work.
Yeah.
So all that is to say, in writing, I engage plenty with secondary resources as well.
Okay, awesome, wow. So you talked about writing, not really going off of a topic or a prompt or anything and doing your own writing. I know you have a conference coming up. Would you mind telling us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I actually pulled a little bit from, I pulled this from my last question. I inserted the topic into the last question, but basically, about a year ago, I was reading this work called The Ethics, and it's by a philosopher with the last name Spinoza. And in part 4 of the Ethics, he introduces this, what he calls the free man as a model of human nature, which nominally sounds good, right? Just saying free man. But while I was reading it, I felt like there were some inconsistencies in the text, and felt like this ideal model of human nature, this ideal free man, is not only unattainable, but it's also perhaps not worth trying to approximate either, for a number of different reasons based off of what had already been said about moral psychology and what's important for people to do together, right? So instead of it just being idiosyncratic, instead people helping people, right? So I thought that there were some inconsistencies, and the most commonly accepted notion is that this free man is a model of human nature that we should all aspire to be. And that happens a lot in the secondary literature, meaning that's what people tend to buy into. But I thought that there were some problems that even if at the end of the day, everybody still believes this free man is the model of human nature, that there are some problems that shouldn't be overlooked and that these need to be reconciled before just moving on, right? And just taking everything for granted. So I'm presenting on this kind of topic at a conference coming up in March, and that's the South Carolina Society for Philosophy. It's also it's a joint meeting, so North Carolinian and South Carolinian philosophers will be coming together. And this conference is more loosely structured in that it's sort of all topics can come together. The conferences generally, though, entail the speaker presenting their paper. That tends to be much more effective than just showing up and trying to talk about something. A lot of times people will actually just read their paper. Like I said, sometimes that actually works really well. And then there will be an audience, obviously varies depending on how big the conference is, and about half of the time will be spent in a Q&A format. Okay. So a lot of people that are knowledgeable in the field will either say what they liked about it, ways that you can improve it, like, oh, you know what, I really like that, but it actually goes a step further. You should address this. Or there could be people who politely, of course, disagree and might press you really hard and expect that you're able to justify your position.
Right.
So half of it is presenting your research and half of it is defending that research. And that generally is the way it'll work. So for instance, my my talk is 40 minutes. So I'll read essentially for 20, and then I'll have to defend for another 20.
Okay. Wow.
That's the loose structure of how these conferences generally work in my field.
Awesome. Wow. Thanks for sharing that with us. All right. So, yes. Let's talk about more of your personal life versus your professional life with reading and writing. Do you find that they align with each other or that they differ?
They actually align with each other quite nicely, and I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so enthusiastic about the field that I'm in, and why I kind of love my hopeful career trajectory, is because like this is what I'm passionate about anyway. So I can read for class and also feel like I'm taking something valuable from it, and it's something that I care about, regardless of if it's for the class, so irrespective of the class itself.
Right.
So that's really, really helpful, instead of being like, I enjoy reading novels and other things, but instead of feeling like I just want to pick up, this other book. Like another thing that I read is like Edgar Allan Poe, so I like Edgar Allan Poe's work. It's like, oh, I really love to pick that up, but I have to do this reading for class. It doesn't really work like that for me.
Okay.
It's stuff that I'm passionate about, and I think I'm open enough to a number of different kinds of readings that I could do. That just because it might not be focused on a particular historical figure that I like or something, like I still am excited to read it.
Yeah.
I think it's just because overall, I think one of the biggest ways that I judge myself is on my knowledge and abilities. So any chance I get to sort of expand that is exciting to me, and it's something that I think is worth pursuing.
Right.
So because of that, my reading habits align quite nicely with the way I perceive myself, and what I want in life, generally speaking.
Right, absolutely. And you could definitely tell, you talked a lot about passion and that you really enjoy this, and you can tell as you're talking about it that this is something that you love picking up. So while you may be reading something very dense, it's something that you're enjoying.
And it all just becomes a matter of like pacing yourself, because like you said, some things are very, very dense, and it's kind of funny because you could spend an hour, and depending on the work, maybe I've gotten through like 10 pages.
Wow.
And sometimes that can be really frustrating, but it's like, I don't understand what you're trying to say, and you just got to keep like plugging away. So the patience for that sort of thing, I think, generally comes from your personal aspirations and your professional ones aligning, and that
Right.
this is an endeavor worth pursuing anyway.
Absolutely. So what are kind of your career goals after school? I know you still have a bit longer to go with schooling. What are your career goals as a philosopher?
So I guess just in terms of position-based, if to simplify it as much as possible, there are a couple different routes that you can go if you want to work in a college or university setting, which ideally is what I would do. So I'd like to be a professor of philosophy. But you can go the research university route, or you can go the smaller school, say liberal arts college or community college or whatever the case may be route. And the way they generally differ is the emphasis on teaching versus research. So
Okay.
at an institution like USC, there's a large emphasis on the research that you're doing, whereas at some other smaller schools it might be on teaching, meaning that instead of contracting you for half your time to be devoted to research and half your time to teaching at an institution like this, maybe
Right.
it's more like most, if not all, of your time will be teaching.
Okay.
So I like the sound of both of those, actually. I enjoy doing research, but I'm also not opposed to doing something where I'm focused on teaching, because I think a big part of the field that I've really appreciated is the devotion to developing young people into independent critical thinkers. So I think that I'll still feel fulfillment if I'm able to do this for a number of undergraduate students, even if I'm not, working on publishing in various journals all the time. I would
Right.
still like to produce unique work, but I think that focusing on teaching is certainly worthwhile. So I could see myself going either route, but ultimately I would just like to teach courses that whether it be like formal logic or ethics courses or political philosophy courses, anything like that is kind of up my alley. I like reading about science, but I don't think that I'm the kind of person that would be able to use a certain kind of background to make a class like that really fulfilling. So anything in those fields or specializations I mentioned before are things I'd be interested in teaching. Does that kind of address what you were looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. So are there any other lasting comments about what we should know about the reading and writing competencies of someone in your field, a philosopher?
Right. So one thing that generally I can say is that these might be the two things that are most important for someone in the field. So that ability to read effectively, to process and synthesize, a great word you used earlier, that's something that is like paramount to being able to last in the profession or to be able to do philosophy really in general. And writing, obviously, it's everything I've said, it kind of leads up to this idea that being able to argue well and present yourself clearly is also something that is incredibly important in the profession. So, reading and writing, those are broad words that can mean a lot of different things in different contexts, but insofar as your reading and writing abilities allow you to argue well and to come up with clear positions on what you think is correct and what you think is not, that's the biggest aspect, arguably, of my field. So I'm glad that you asked me to do this because reading and writing isn't something that can just be passed over like it could occur in some other professional settings.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all this with us, Brady. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mary Catherine.
Of course.